Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Training Improvement Café, where we dive deeper into different topics that surround training, that involve training, to inspire you and to help you to improve your training, but most of all also to get to know the guests that we have here. And today I am joined by a very cool guest. I've known him for quite a while already. I've been an instructional designer myself, so I immediately start to get personal with you. An instructional designer myself, and back in the day when I created one of my first projects, I worked together with DialogueTrainer because we worked on a project for front office employees at the University of Utrecht, and we wanted them to practice with something that could happen in real life, but we didn't want to simulate it in the classroom. We wanted to make it scalable. We wanted them to practice with something that could happen and to give them that emotion as well that they could experience if that thing happened in real life. So that's how I got in touch with Michiel. Welcome, Michiel, here in Rotterdam.
Good to be here, Roy.
And I invited him to be the guest to the Training Improvement Café because I really want to deep dive into your story behind DialogueTrainer, but also where your passion for L&D comes from, and I know that you have a lot to share. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah.
And we have time,
Here.
definitely. Can you maybe, in short, 1-2 minutes, introduce yourself to the audience, to the people that don't know you yet?
Yeah. So I'm Michiel Hulsbergen. I'm a psychologist, and I studied business administration. And I have a long background in conversation skills training, starting as a training actor actually when I was 18 years old. After a little bit of television work, first invested some time in learning how to act, but then I realized at some point that I was a pretty lousy actor. And psychology and understanding human behavior from that sense sounded a lot more like a potential for a career for me. I studied psychology, then provided classroom trainings for a couple of years. Then at some point I realized that there was a huge gap between how psychologists look at conversation skills and look at emotions, and how organizations look at, for instance, emotions. As psychologists say, emotions are functional information processing systems, so to say. Business administrators usually say emotions are in the way of rationality. So I spent a lot more time investing in sort of that gap in knowledge. Also, difference between those paradigms. I studied business administration after that. Spent a couple of years doing emotion research. I was working towards a PhD, but then DialogueTrainer happened, and that sounded like a very worthwhile time spent. So I built a company which now consists of 21 people, and we are building conversation simulations, which of course have everything to do with my sort of background in role play.
Yeah.
So
and I can imagine that your background as a psychologist also comes in very handy with developing those simulations.
Absolutely. So that's one of the topics that I assume we'll dive deeper into. Of course, when it comes to behavior and conversations, there's a lot of implicit skill and a lot of sort of nuanced insights that direct our behavior. And to build vocabulary to advance people in that requires providing them with learning interventions, but also reflecting and developing the right theory to support learning. Yeah. So yes, there's everything to do with each other. Yeah.
But then, of course, those skills and that knowledge comes in very handy. I can imagine when you started DialogueTrainer.
Absolutely, and I can be quite specific about it. So one of my most insightful moments when I was first starting to work as a training actor, I was working with police officers, and I was still doing acting school back then. And what struck me was when I was doing role play with police officers, those police officers were always completely believable in their acting. And to me, that was so insightful. I mean, here I was as an actor trying to be completely believable, standing in front of a police officer who just was believable and didn't have any acting training at all. And what I concluded from that was that being believable has everything to do with what you strive for in a situation. So if I'm truly committed to helping you with your problem, then I'm believable in any interaction, whether it be role play or any other type of interaction. But when I'm distracted in my role and I'm actually doing something else, then it just becomes messy. So for me, conversation skills training is a lot about focus. What are you actually there for? Whether that is in role play or as any professional in any role.
Yeah.
But
And confidence also a part of it, or is that not necessarily? Because I can imagine as a police officer, you also need to have a certain confidence when you approach people, when you're in situations.
Yeah, but I think also another insight there, the confidence of the police officer also comes from the fact that they're in an environment where they're representing an organization. And this is for a thought experiment. If I have to set a boundary to somebody in an alleyway and I'm the only person there and they're the only person there, I'm not going to feel very confident. If you imagine there's two big guys standing behind you or a very big woman standing behind you, protecting you, that sort of changes your behavior in that situation if you think of it.
Yeah.
So I think that the confidence that you want police officers to have has everything to do with knowing what you're there for and also knowing that your backup exists.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. And then when you started DialogueTrainer, what was your goal? What was your objective? What did you want to achieve?
I wanted to show that it was doable.
Okay.
That's the most important objective.
Yeah.
I wanted to prove that it could be done.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll fill in a little bit more about that. The DialogueTrainer wasn't my first company where I developed online simulations. I tried to do something digital like that ever since, I think the first versions were 2005, 2006.
Mm-hmm.
But all the time I had clients saying this can't possibly work because you can immediately tell it's fake. And I felt all the time, I can say the same thing about a novel or a Disney film. I can immediately say that it's fake, but it doesn't matter. I'm still crying when I see Bambi struggle on the ice.
Yeah, who doesn't? Yeah.
But what I realized is that I needed sort of circumstance where I could validate this innovation in another way. So when DialogueTrainer started, or the project that became DialogueTrainer started, that was at Utrecht University. I was doing research there. And I felt they were started with an initiative to build a platform to train large groups of students. And for me, that was a perfect environment to both get some of the software funded, so organize that we could actually develop something. I mean, there was a project there and I could just jump on that train. And also create a circumstance where we could really validate and really prove what worked about that software. So I also published research. 2015-16 we did research. And then we could clearly prove what the difference is between the impact of, for instance, reading a text or watching a film or following a lecture and just interacting with a character. Even though the character Rita was very, very ugly, we still found that they challenged people.
Yeah.
And that's essential, I think, for learning, being challenged.
Absolutely. So you got some good striking results from
we got serious results.
Yeah. Can you elaborate a bit on those results?
Yeah, the most important, really interesting result was concerned self-efficacy. So we found that people who read a text, if you compare people who read a text or people that play a simulation, now which one of the two will feel more confident about their own ability to navigate that conversation in real life? Well, I'm not going to challenge you with it too much, but the readers of the text were convinced that it was easy. And that's how text works. If I read a text about something complex and I understand the text, then I'll conclude, yeah, that's okay. I can do that.
Yeah.
But if I then interact with an avatar and I have to give bad news in this sense, then suddenly I start feeling these dilemmas involved. And then suddenly I start feeling a lack of control and I have to make complex decisions. Suddenly that's a lot harder. Now, when we first presented this result to teachers as well, some of the teachers said, well, apparently a text is not such a bad instruction instrument then after all. And I was like, not if building confidence is the thing you want to do, but you want to help people navigate complex conversations. And then it's not optimal. I mean, building confidence, if it's false trust, that doesn't help anyone. That just creates new risk.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of evidence that we provided. And indeed, simulation made people feel much more confident about their own capacity, but then they were much more open to reading the text. So
together.
So the combined interventions, that is actually where an optimal solution lies.
Yeah.
And so problematizing and then providing solutions and interacting between the two.
Yeah. And then practicing
and then practicing and gaining new insights and becoming more confident, but then well-based confidence.
Yeah.
and just also identifying with the skill involved, I think, at some point.
Yeah. And then you compare text to online simulations. Did you also compare real life simulations with the online simulations?
That was very the reason it took a long time for us to do that. It's because it's very hard to get organized.
You can imagine. Yeah.
So a training actor is of course quite a pricey intervention.
Yeah.
But what we did do eventually is we did a lot of comparisons between people that role played and also performed during online interactions, so with avatars, and then also had their tests with actors. So for instance, at veterinary science, they used to have review sessions where they sat in front of an actor and had to show their skill. And we could illustrate that there was correlations between performance on the one and performance on the other means.
Yeah. So can you say, you started off by saying I wanted to prove that we could do it.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you've proven that you could do it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's still a lot of uncharted ground here.
Mm-hmm. And I can imagine a lot of new technologies that can add to.
Yeah. But I think what we have now, I mean, we have the huge benefit of having worked in the field for, in my personal case, almost 20 years, even 30 years when you take all the experiences with role play involved. But 10 years dedicated at technology development. And now we're in a time where a lot happens with AI. And AI can do marvelous stuff. But we have a lot of understanding of how people learn to communicate.
Maybe we should give it a try.
Shall we?
Because I think it's interesting to make it more tangible. Also for the people watching this from home. I mean, we've been talking about role playing, about conversational skills. But let's just give it a try. So I'll get my laptop. And then I think we can play one or two of these simulations, right?
Yeah, right.
We can dive deeper into the game-changing leadership demo. So I'm really curious how that's gonna work out. You can lead me through it a little bit because I see a dashboard now. I hope that we made it that the people at home can also see it. What can I expect in this demo?
Well, what you have in this learning environment is about game-changing leadership. It's something that we built for a client in the US where they had a problem. And the problem was that a lot of their leaders felt overworked and overwhelmed. And usually when you look at an organization, if leaders feel overworked and overwhelmed, then what was the problem? Then either they're setting objectives that are unachievable or they're not delegating responsibilities well. So naturally, in an IT organization like this one, you want people to adopt responsibility so you can leave things with them. So what we did is we built a learning environment that served two purposes. It should both provide people with an interaction about coaching and show them the dynamics of a coaching session, like coaching your professional, your team members, your staff. And it should also persuade people that coaching is the way to go. So what this learning environment does is you interact with a Dave who has a problem. And there are three fundamentally different approaches you can take in guiding him. You can be directive and tell him what to do. You can be inspiring and tell him that he's doing well and that you have complete faith in him. Or you can coach him. And then you have a second simulation right after. That's the one on the right there. Following your conversation on the left, you see the impact of that on his performance. So if you've been very directive, he comes back to you and he says, well, I tried what you said, but it didn't work. If you've been very inspiring, then he says, well, I tried what you said and it seemed to work at first, but then it didn't. And if you've been coaching him, then in the second role play, he says, I tried something and I ended up trying something else and that also worked. And what I actually want to tell you about is something that we might do with the other teams as well. So that interaction both gives you the experience with coaching and shows you why you should coach. Now in this learning environment, when we scroll down, you can also see that there's an interaction there with a coach, an online coach, that guides you through a reflective process. And then we have a new simulation with open speech, where actually the guardrails are removed and you speak to Dave using AI. But let's first play with Dave. And I'll provide the introduction so you don't have to do all that reading because there's some text to read there. Dave is a project manager in your team. This project is following behind. The reason may be that he's making use of people from different teams, different parts of the organizations, and he's finding it difficult to sort of align them. So usually what happens in an organization is that then these people are also immersed in other processes which their own leaders have said are more important than the project he's leading. You interact with him and you, of course, then want to build rapport first. In this case, you know that he's a keen father. He has young children who he's very fond of. You can discuss that to build rapport. But you also know that he's interacted with a steering committee where he was relatively successful. Now, of course, if your objective is to motivate him also in line with his work responsibilities, then that might be the subject you discuss with him. So we're going to do that. We're going to do it first with a work form where we provide answer options.
Hi, you said you wanted to meet with me?
So now I have to choose.
And your job is to each time choose one of these options there. You can also do other things sometimes if needed and add a suggestion, but we'll just probably stay close to these validated answer options.
Well, I like to build rapport, as you said. So I always start
Great.
with...
The kids just got back to school this week, so we're back to normal life.
So I just started with how's the family. Well, the kids just got back. That's amazing. And let me see.
So what do we do then? So you have three options here. One is that's good. Let's take a moment to talk about your project or the progress of your project. So tell me, how did things go with the steering committee?
Feels
or good, I'm
direct.
sure they will take after their parents and excel.
That would be my first option.
You feel inclined to
Well, thank you.
So now you have built rapport with him.
Yes.
He's looking
He's
like
happy.
he's relaxing in the conversation.
Exactly.
He's happy.
Yeah.
So you've
So we
achieved
can-
your first objective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can dive a bit deeper now. And for that, I like to ask questions instead of, because the other options now make me feel like their statements. So I want to ask how things go with the
Thank you
steering
for
committee.
asking. I think we managed, even when handling the most critical questions. Of course, Bob was continuously questioning our assumptions.
So now
All right.
something in his expression has changed.
Yeah.
So he's complaining a little bit about Bob. And of course, we can dive into the interaction with Bob now, or we can advance the conversation. But so what would you do?
I would go for the question option again. Do you see the value of his points, though? Even though it sounds maybe a bit
It's
too
a
direct.
controlling question.
Yeah.
It's kind of directive.
Yeah.
Do you see
Yeah.
the value of his point? You should.
Yeah. It's
So in
maybe
this
a
case, I'll help you
close
out a
question.
little bit.
Yeah.
You really don't want to discuss the steering committee too much. So what you might as well do is, it sounds like you're finding your way with Bob. And you
then
sort of park the
navigate to
subject
the
and then
other,
navigate to the next subject. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I'm learning. It's a challenge, but we are learning.
All right. So now I get 4 options. And I can see I wanted to share how I see this team developing. That's great. Learning is vital. That's good to hear. I'd like to hear your opinion. And I notice your project is falling behind schedule. Let's brainstorm some solutions. I want actually him to tell me that he feels that his project is falling behind schedule. Instead of me saying that, because that also feels quite directive.
So you don't want to tell him that he's falling behind. You want to ask him how he thinks things are doing.
Yeah, so that's this one. That's good to hear. I'd like to hear your opinion.
Yeah, of course. I guess we are making progress, but not as much as we'd hoped.
So now you can say, so your project is falling behind. Could you tell me more? Do you have an explanation for this? You see opportunities to fuel growth in your team. Now let's take a moment. So the third one, you see opportunities to fuel growth in your team, is the inspiring one.
Yeah.
So that's the one aimed at sort of building motivation, but generic motivation. Well, you don't need to build motivation with him.
No, he is
exploring a
motivated.
challenge with
Exactly.
him. He's
Yeah.
already motivated.
Yeah.
Do you have an explanation for this? Positions him as an expert.
Yeah.
And you're asking him about it. So your project is falling behind. Could you tell me more? Is doing the same thing. The probably the best thing about so your project is falling behind. Could you tell me more? Is that it leaves it even more open. So do you have an explanation for this? Forces it to reflect on it already.
Yeah.
And could you tell me more? Just opens the conversation to him. So that's the most low key. Could you just share more information? So in this case, probably the first way is the best fit to do.
Well, it seems people are not doing what I'm asking them to do. They say they don't have the bandwidth to get the job done. No one seems to go the extra mile. It doesn't feel like we are functioning as a high-performing team.
You can see that it does something with him when he says that. So he feels...
So you're now in a place where he's willing to share his struggles with you. He's not selling it to you. He's telling you, I'm struggling. Now, what the interesting question is, if I may ask you, you're now playing.
Yeah.
So what happens? How do you make your choices? How does that work?
I try to stay close to what I would say in a situation like that, who I am. But I'm also thinking, all right, what do I want to achieve? And what does the system want me to achieve as well? That's also something that's going through my mind. So I'm sort of reflecting on all these answer options to say, all right, what would I do? But also, what would this system like me to do to get a good outcome? Sort of continuously navigating between these two options. Yeah.
So what you say there, that's a reflection on how you are navigating that conversation.
Yeah.
So, but a lot of that, of course, is implicit.
Mm-hmm.
So what would the system expect me to do here relates to the sort of theory that's being shared with you. It's about coaching. So that's the most coaching approach. It's also about, okay, what am I actually seeing here in front of me? This Dave guy, what works for him, what doesn't work for him? You have lots of assumptions about that.
Yeah.
Well, what immersive learning is all about is having these assumptions and putting them to the test.
Yeah.
And sort of saying, if I'm going to say this, then he probably behaves a little bit like that, then I'll do this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my point is, that is a reflective process.
Mm-hmm.
You're being strategic about the conversation, but at the same time, it's very much informed by your emotions.
Yeah.
It's a truly emotional process as well.
Yeah.
So when before we were discussing, is this real? The fact that you're immersed in this conversation, really sort of exploring your way through it, that is very real.
Definitely. And then Dave doesn't necessarily have to be in front of me, but still,
you're still thinking about it. And of course, there's also this little thing that he's making facial expressions right now.
Exactly.
And our brain has a tendency, of course, to tie meaning to those facial expressions.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have the capacity as humans to identify anywhere between 3,500 and 10,000 facial expressions as humans. He only shows 60 fundamentally different expressions, but you can tell right away that like now there's a little bit of sadness.
Yeah,
he's now looking at me sort of like with an expectant look, and then he's losing his energy for a moment and thinking, oh, this doesn't work for me at all.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot happening there that you automatically tie meaning to.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you relate it, of course, to your own objective in this conversation, which is to position him and sort of get his insights.
Yeah.
So we'll make a couple of more choices.
All right.
Let's see how we go.
It doesn't feel like we're functioning as a high-performing team. So I would say that sounds challenging. What have you tried to boost the team's performance?
2 weeks ago, when this became clear, I did point it out to them. I first addressed it in a team session. I then approached each person individually to ask why they are not meeting their deliverables. What more can I do?
So now he's asking you what more he can do.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking determined.
Yeah.
He's looking a little bit irritated, maybe even, after sharing all the things that he has tried. So if we look at this from the perspective of motivation, what is he motivated to do right now? If we look at him, so Dave, this character, what is he motivated to do right now? What is he saying? What more can I do?
He feels a bit desperate. He I don't know, out of control. I don't know.
He doesn't. What usually happens when people commit to solving something is that people do that to the extent that they are actually able to solve a challenge.
Yeah.
And after that, they'll disengage.
Uh-huh.
And of course, we both have our own individual background, but he could be a little bit disengaged, saying, "What more can I do?"
Yeah.
So what we do now is we make sure to increase his engagement in the situation or his commitment to solve this challenge again.
Yeah.
So how will we do this? There are always more things you can do. That's sort of a persuasive approach, which is that going to motivate him? If he says, what more can I do? Probably not.
I don't think so.
It could be true, but it doesn't matter. You don't reach him.
No.
It sounds to me they are not convinced of the project's relevance. that's sort of pointing something out to him that he might indeed nod to, but I want him to solve this challenge and conclude this.
Yeah.
So you already approach the team as a whole and individually. That's something fundamentally different. So what more can I do? And instead of contradicting him or informing him, I'm just going to say, so this is what you already tried. And then giving space again
For him
to expand on that.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. I know they are capable people. There is plenty of evidence for that.
And what immediately happens is, if you sort of stress what he's already tried, he becomes much more open again, and he starts sharing his own ideas about the team. And now from his facial expression, you can tell that the conversation has deepened.
Yeah.
Now, all of this is not real. Dave is an avatar.
Yeah.
There's a scenario behind this.
Mm-hmm.
But you see that your capacity to navigate this conversation relies on using theory, but also just using your own cadre of reference and just getting immersive and just starting to explore different approaches.
Yeah.
Now, this conversation runs on a little bit longer, but I assume we'll close it now.
Yeah.
We might
I think this gives a good impression.
So that is a work form with avatars that we strongly believe is optimal when we want people to experience the dynamic of the conversation.
Yeah.
So no work form does that better than with answer options. Because you challenge people, it's very goal directed, you choose between those options, it's very easy to play together because we're discussing which one of these would you choose.
Yeah.
It's a very optimal work form for training in conversation models, for instance. You want to try something else?
Let's give it a go. Yeah.
Now, at the end of this learning trajectory, after reflecting with a coach, we also get an interaction with Dave, and now we remove the guardrails.
Uh-oh.
So what we now have is a Dave who says what he thinks should be said, and you can say
whatever I think should be said.
Whatever you think should be said.
All right.
And he responds to that openly. Now, behind this interaction is still a conversation model. So there's lots of, if the conversation goes here, that's what happens. If the conversation goes there, that's what happens. Sometimes it does mismatch because it's a very efficient use of AI. I might also show you the newest advances later. But this is an open speech interaction. Now, by now, you've of course gotten to know Dave already a little bit. You know a little bit what works for him. But,
like his kids.
Yeah.
Hi, you said you wanted to meet with me?
Now we have to activate the microphone. Yeah.
Yeah. I was very curious how everything is going with you and the kids. Are they doing well after their holiday? Because I think they talked about their holiday, right?
The kids are doing great. Anyway, it's good to see you. So, what did you want to talk about?
I was curious about how your project is going at the moment. How are you feeling currently with the state of the project?
Okay, yeah, let's discuss this. I guess we are making progress, but not as much as we'd hoped.
All right. And what do you think happened? Why the progress is not going as
Well, I think
you
we are
hoped?
doing well. I guess we are making progress, but not as much as we'd hoped. It's just, I just don't feel in control.
All right. How come?
Well, it seems people are not doing what I'm asking them to do. They say they don't have the bandwidth to get the job done. No one seems to go the extra mile. It doesn't feel like we are functioning as a high-performing team.
That sounds challenging.
Yes, indeed it is.
So let's stop it here. So
It's difficult.
it's very difficult.
Yeah. I mean, if you have the options, you have a lot of time to reflect. You have time to read. You can link the different options to what you think would be best. But when he's just falling silent, and I'm sitting here and I'm also falling silent, it makes me feel a bit uncomfortable, a bit awkward.
Yeah. That's very I think very recognizable. So the first thing that we started noticing when we started providing open speech sims is it's not easy engaging in such a role play. I mean, you don't have a training actor there. There's other people, of course, in this case, literally other people watching you play.
Yeah.
But also, for a moment, a question: is this real?
Yes, but not real. But it feels real because the emotions that I feel are sort of real.
Yeah. So
because I'm immersed. Yeah.
And I also think that the reason you are immersed, there's no alternative to being immersed, because you're sitting in front of an avatar, and your objective right now is to legitimately interact with that avatar.
Exactly.
So the only way to do it is to get involved.
Yeah. Let's go to the next part of our conversation.
Yeah.
We'll go to rounding it off, and for that I want to ask you some personal questions.
Sure.
And also questions that hopefully help other people on where they can find inspiration. Every learning professional probably looks at other people looking for inspiration. I know that myself, follow a lot of people on LinkedIn and get inspired almost daily. If I ask you, who is your biggest inspiration in learning and development, in training, or what relates to training, so that people looking at this from at home can maybe also follow that person? Who would you say is your biggest inspiration?
I gotta say, I find it a very difficult question, and that's not because there's not plenty of inspiring people around, because there are many inspiring people around. But it's just that when you're working in the field of innovation, also touching on technology, there are so many things you need to read into. So when it comes to emotion research, and taking that emotions direct our behavior, especially in conversations. And then I think the important work is, for instance, Nico Freida, the Dutch psychologist.
You already referred to earlier. Yeah.
He, for instance, is of the quote or the statement: "Emotions are promoters of interest," which is a very sensible way of look at how emotions direct our behaviors as promoters of interest. That's a very interesting read. And then you have, of course, Paul Ekman, who does a lot about facial expression and basic emotion theory. You have Lisa Feldman Barrett, who does a lot about the sort of sense making of emotions, the constructivist aspect. Who am I? Which also defines my behavior. There's a lot of interesting reading there, I think. I recently read Keith Keating's book, The Trusted Learning Advisor, which I really appreciated because it's sort of one of the things I personally feel a little bit focused on is that learning advisors are usually very modest people who like to add value. But I think it's time to take a different approach. Learning is an essential solution, especially in a time where there's so much change going around that you can't navigate this phase of the development of our society without learning a lot. I mean, learning is an absolute necessity. Learning is a process where we, as learning and development experts, professionals, have to really step up our game.
Yeah,
and that is Keith Keating writes a bit about that, which I really liked. Then gamification is, of course, an interesting subject to touch on, especially when you're working with simulations.
Yeah.
So, to what extent can we use gamification to, when learning becomes frustrating, and it shall, to sort of move people beyond that by also making it fun to some extent.
Yeah.
And that so there's a lot more to read, but those are the domains that I've most enjoyed, I think.
Yeah. All right. We'll make sure that everyone you've just mentioned goes in the show notes so that everyone can look it up if they're interested. You already mentioned Trusted Learning Advisor by Keith Keating. Is there another book you think, oh, this inspired me as a learning professional to get to the next level, that you really took some interesting takes away from?
A lot of the literature about gamification.
Okay.
I'm failing to come up with titles, but the last time when I really took time to really deeply read lots of books was when I was working on a thesis about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that laid a lot of groundwork for me. I can absolutely advise any learning professional to take a couple of years to really study hard.
Mm-hmm.
But recently, I too have lived a very busy life. But one thing that I might still share, I think the best author of all, just not a learning professional, is Frans de Waal. I think we should be very proud of his work on primates, on monkeys, how they interact. And that has been, to me, very insightful about how people interact with each other. Chimpanzee politics, it doesn't end there.
No.
It unfortunately passed away 2 years ago, or 1.5 years ago. But that is, of all the readers, that's the one that fills my heart with warmth the most.
Yeah.
That's all.
It's a very good inspiration. Yeah. I agree with that one. Last, before we close off, I'd like to come up with a random question. And you can pick a number, 1 to 10. I don't know. Well, I know, but I don't exactly know which question is behind which number. And I'm going to ask that question.
Does everybody always say 7?
No.
Okay, then 7.
7? All right. If you could only teach people one skill for the rest of your life, what would it be and why?
That requires focus.
Mm.
That it will be that people should really trust their emotions as a source of information, especially in organizations.
Nice.
So when I look at behavior of professionals, I notice all the time that a lot of that behavior is very sensible, also when it's not in line with the strategy. But what people could learn is to take their emotions very serious and see for themselves what's at stake in this situation for me. Why do I do the things that I do?
Mm-hmm.
What am I driven by, both in terms of threats and opportunities, as in terms of objectives that I might have on longer term versus what seems most relevant on this spot. And that is, I think the world can really be helped by that sort of insight, to take our emotions very serious as promoters of interest, but then of course always relate them to an organization strategy or relate them to a personal mission. So my single lesson to the world would be navigate your own emotions and take them serious as a sort of source of information. That is very important to organizations and to professionals individually.
Thank you. And thank you for watching this episode of the Training Improvement Café. I hope that you got a lot of insights out of this one. I definitely did. So thanks, Michiel, for sharing all your insights. And I hope to see you again at our next Training Improvement Café. And in the meantime, keep improving.